Welcome to Veteran Voices, a podcast dedicated to giving a voice to those that have served in our country's armed forces. On this series, we sit down with a wide variety of veterans and veteran advocates to gain their insights, perspective, and experiences. We'll talk with many individuals about their challenging transition from active duty to the private sector, and we'll discuss some of the most vital issues facing veterans today. Join us for this episode of Veteran Voices. Good afternoon, Scott Luton and Chris Barnes with you here on Veteran Voices. Thanks for joining us here today. On today's show, we are talking with a longtime friend, Vietnam vet and industry dynamo. So stay tuned for a great conversation. We've got a quick programming note. This program is part of the Supply Chain Now family of programming. Find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Simply search for Veteran Voices, and we'd love for you to subscribe for free so you don't miss outstanding conversations just like this. All right, so Chris Barnes, how you doing today?
Doing fine, Scott. Thanks for letting me partake in the show.
Well, this is a really neat episode, and I'm glad. I think this will be the first time in probably a dozen episodes I've had a co-host, so it's great to have you sitting in the chair beside me, especially for this guest here today that you and I both value our friendship with and we've collaborated with for so long, and now we get to dive deeper in his story. You ready to do it?
Ready to go. Thank you.
All right. So let's welcome in our featured guest, the one and only Mike Roman. Mike, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Scott. How are you doing?
We're good. We are so good. We can't see you, but I remember plenty of car drives to Savannah. I remember plenty of board meetings sitting beside you and lunches. So you're here in spirit, at least audio with us, and we can't wait to pick your brain a bit.
I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to that. And how you doing, Chris?
Doing good, Mike. It's great to hear your voice.
Yours too, sir.
All right. So, Chris, we're going to start with, getting to know him a little bit before maybe military, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he was doing something before he was in Vietnam, but let's try to find that out. So, Mike, if you can, just kind of let's go back. I don't know if you want to go back to your high school days, college days, whatever, but kind of before the military, before you started working. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and maybe some stories around what made you the person you are.
On my dad's side of the family, my dad's a first-generation American. His mother was born in Poland. His father was born in Lithuania. I grew up in that home in Detroit, Michigan. Was my younger brother, myself, my mom, my dad's mother, my dad's father, and my dad's mother's father, who was a Prussian captain in the cavalry. He always ate first. When he burped and got up from the table, it was a signal for us to go eat. He never spoke to my father, never spoke to my mother. I don't know if he spoke to my dad's father. He would speak to my grandmother, and in his thick German accent. And that said, he shared a home with my grandmother and with his other daughter, Helen. But when he was with us, he didn't speak English at all, and he never spoke to anyone other than my grandmother that I can remember. He and I played a game during the summers. He lived at the back of the house in the bedroom, which was beside a porch. And he'd unlock the screen porch door and would open the garage where he had a workbench. He was a cabinet maker. And in his workbench, which I now have, he had all his hand tools. And this game we played for, it seems like ever. He would open the door, let me, sneak out, go into the garage, open his drawers, and line all his tools up in size order. He had a broken hip, and he walked with a cane, and he would come out, look at the tools, point at one, and kind of push it, and look at it and say. He didn't speak, but he'd point with his cane and said, "It doesn't go there, it moves," and he'd point to where it should be. And when I rearranged the tools to his satisfaction, he'd nod at me, turn around and walk back, and it was my job then to put all the tools back in the right drawers. We played that game forever, never speaking a word.
An early lesson in 5S, Mike.
Yes. It was, Scott. You're right on, Scott.
Scott, good point. So, Mike, you speak German, or you said you didn't speak any words?
Well, he didn't speak because I was below his rank. But I grew up speaking Russian, German, Lithuanian, Polish, and English. And one of my early lessons, I was 4 or 5. And my grandfather, I called him Dash, and I never knew why, and I learned years later. And my grandmother, they put me in the car with them. We'd go to the delicatessen to pick up lunch meats for the week. And on one of the conversations in the car on the way was, we need to keep an eye on the butcher because he's putting his thumb on a scale. So, of course, being an astute 4 or 5-year-old, I was watching the butcher very closely when my grandmother and grandfather turned around to have a conversation. And he put his thumb on the scale, and I yelled out in Lithuanian, "He's got his thumb on the scale." First thing my grandfather did was come over and clap me upside the head and say, "English, we don't want to embarrass these people who let us come into their country." Then he says, "You SOB, take your thumb off the scale."
And he was probably as confused as everybody because he didn't know what you said.
Yes, he was. So that's some of those memories. They were wonderful. What an upbringing. It's like you said, the 5S about where things go in a proper organized way. Absolutely wonderful.
So you grew up in Detroit, the Detroit area? You went to school there?
Went to grade school there. Dad was working for Ford, and my grandfather had died. And my grandmother refused to leave Detroit. So on 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, she decided to die. We had a funeral there, and then the family moved to Louisville. And I went to high school in Louisville. And as strange as it may sound, I met another Vietnam veteran at the Johns Creek Veterans Association meeting.
Johns Creek, Georgia, for our listeners, which is just north of Atlanta.
I was walking out into the kitchen. As he was walking out of the kitchen, he looked at me. I looked at him. We proceeded to walk forward. I put my hand out for a handshake. He put his hand out for a shake. I said, "John, how you doing?" He says, "Mike, it's been 50 years, but I've been doing fine." He was my high school buddy. We had been in every class for 4 years. And where do we meet? Johns Creek, Georgia.
50 years later. Wow.
50 years. It was almost to the day, 50 years later.
One additional follow-up question. When did you move to the Atlanta area?
We moved here in 81. I'd gotten a job with Control Data, and I was a programmer. And we were writing an MRP2 system. It's one of the first for smaller computers. We were writing it for a mini computer, and it turned out that the mini computer was the wrong market. So they kept me there to help convert it to a PC-based system.
If we can go back, Mike, I want to get to that point, but I want to talk about your getting into the military and then the transition out of the military, because that's a big part of our listenership for this.
Yes, it is.
This program is how do we transition into the public sector. So I got a question. You're pretty well networked, from what I can tell, in this area. As you talked about, your high school friend after 50 years. I was at another event. I went to Bradley University, a basketball game watching event here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I met Mike Kotler, who happened to be a Navy submarine person.
Submarine Mike.
Just sitting there chit-chatting with him. You weren't even there. It had nothing to do with you. And then I started talking about the Vietnam vets and Johns Creek, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I go there often." And I'm like, "Do you really?" And I said, "Do you know Mike Roman?" He's like, "Oh, who doesn't know Mike Roman?" So I thought that was pretty cool there. And then one more, if you don't mind.
No.
So we were sitting, you and I, Mike Roman, were sitting at the Starbucks in Johns Creek, Georgia. But we're sitting there just chit-chatting. I had my back to the door. Somebody walks out, and I could see the shadow. And I noticed you looked up and saw who it was, and they walked past. And all of a sudden, you said, "Hey, hold on." And you're like, hey, Tommy. And I'm like, who's this guy talking about? And I look over, and you're like, "Tommy Glavine, come back here." And Scott, who is Tom Glavine?
He is a Hall of Fame Major League pitcher that won the 95 World Series in Game 6 against Cleveland. And he's a legend in baseball and certainly in Atlanta.
And still lives in North Atlanta suburbs. So anyhow, we're sitting there, and I'm thinking, okay, Mike, this is ridiculous. You can't just start seeing famous people and calling them out. Sure enough, Tommy walks right back to us, got to our table. Mike got up, shook his hand, and they carried on for 5 or 10 minutes. What's your relationship there, Mike? Tell me about that.
Well, Tommy won't admit it, but what happened was I was playing hockey for the Delta traveling team. I could play the home games, but since I wasn't a Delta employee, I could only play the home games. And Boom Boom Jeffrion, whose son Bobby ran the team, saw me at practice one day, and he had me over. He wanted to know who in the heck I was. He says, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Yeah, I know who you are." Is you going to shake my hand? I said, "Yeah, I'll shake your hand. You want my autograph?" I said, "Hell no." And he says, "Why not?" I said, "Because you weren't friends with my friend." "Well, who's your friend?" "Gordie Howe."
Wow.
So there was this love-hate relationship between Boom Boom and myself. I mean, the man was an outstanding person, heck of a hockey player, but coached us. And then one day I'm coming off the ice, and he grabs me and says, "Roman." And every once in a while, he would pretend he didn't know how to speak English. So Boom Boom says, "I'm getting this guy who's coming in. You tell me whether this kid's good or no good." "Well, when am I supposed to do that, Boom Boom?" "After practice." "Well, how long am I supposed to do that for, Boom Boom?" He says, 2 hours. I said, "Yeah, I got nothing better to do than to skate with you guys for 2 hours and play with some kid for 2 hours. And he says, "Well, good, Roman, you need to learn to skate." So I had this kid come out, and I put him through his paces. And he was really good. He was faster than me. The only problem is he was trying to prove he was better than you. And that's not how you play hockey. And I picked up on that. So I was frustrating him. And he was trying this one move where he deked me to one side, and I opened that skate. Deked me to the other side, I opened that skate. He puts the puck between my legs and then tries to pick the puck up on the other side of me. That's the oldest trick in the book. All I got to do is put my elbows out. As he's looking down, he runs into an elbow. And after the third or fourth time he's laying on the ice, he backhanded me on the back of the knees with his stick. I grabbed him and I said, "You do that to me one more time, I'm going to teach you how to eat without teeth." That was Tommy Glavin.
So Tommy was a good hockey player. I mean,
he was at Boston. I believe it was Boston University. He was a star and was being auditioned for the L.A. King, and Boom Boom chose me to help interview him.
You're a good hockey player, from what I hear in the past. So that was the whole relationship there.
Used to be.
Yeah, we had to go through Mike Roman's hockey talent agent just to get you booked for the show here, Mike. I love Chris. I'm so glad you brought that up, especially with all the Tommy Glavin fans and Braves fans and baseball fans. It's the world gets so smaller when you start peeling the layers of the onion back.
And he does a lot for charities.
You are right. And he's developing into a great baseball announcer, by the way. I've enjoyed these Braves broadcasts in the last few years. All right. So, Chris, we're going to transition. As much as I bet there's so many other hockey stories there, we're going to transition and pick Mike's brain more about his time in uniform.
You know, what got you into the military? I didn't realize that about your grandfather, but it sounds like it might have been in your blood. What was that appealing factor to get you involved?
Mom's family came over in the 1500s. Some of the family came as indentured Irish slaves. And that part of the family was in every conflict on this continent from the French and Indian Wars. So I've got that in my background. My dad's mother's father was the Prussian cavalry guy. Mom and Dad both served in World War II. He was a B-29 pilot. She was an OR nurse, and met my dad in the operating room as he was recovering from a crashed B-29. We used to have foot and wall lockers growing up, inspections. Not really foot lockers or real wardrobe things, but our dressers and our closet had to be inspected. The shoes had to be lined up a special way. Socks had to be folded a certain way. Underwear had to be folded a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was pretty good in grade school. I was pretty good in high school. And my dad being a first-generation American, and I being his oldest son, where does an American first-generation Catholic go to college? Notre Dame. Well, I had a partial scholarship at the University of Louisville to help my next door neighbor who was a jock. Very good. He as a matter of fact, played with the Steelers for a while, but wasn't a study freak, let's put it that way. So I was going to help him through University of Louisville. And my graduation present was an envelope from my dad as I was dressing to leave for my graduation. Dad handed me the envelope. And I shook it. I said, there's no keys in here. And he says, no. He says, but I got your ticket. And I said, oh, boy. And so I opened up, and it was a bus ticket. And I said, bus ticket? What's this? He says, oh, the family's moving to South Bend. That's a ticket. You're on the bus Monday morning, and you have an interview with Brother Raphael at Notre Dame Monday afternoon, and then Tuesday you report to me in the foundry. I said, hey, I'm supposed to help Ira get through college. He says, oh, yeah? What does that pay? I said, well, I get books and room and board. Oh, does it pay for your meals? Does it pay for your education? I said, no. He said, where are you going to get that money? I said, you promised me that you'd send me to school. He says, I am. You're going to Notre Dame. So went to interview with Brother Raphael and explained to him that I had not signed the letter that he had read that was impressed with, and that I wasn't going to start the school that and the date they had me promised for. And at that time, Vietnam was heating up. And he says, well, you know, Mike, he said, the Army just may draft you. And I said, well, that's fine. And I said, but I can get into another school. He says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll help you get into Indiana University's South Bend campus. So he did. And Dad didn't speak to me for probably 3 months. But I went to Indiana University, got kicked out after my first semester. There was a woman who didn't care for the Vietnam War, was my English teacher, it failed me, called me up at home and said, hey, I'll help you get back in because you've been kicked out. Come over to my office, we'll write a letter. So she helped me write a letter to get back in. I got back in, took her for the same class. I failed again. I got kicked out for my second semester. She helped me get back in. Third semester, I made all A's and decided that I needed to grow up. And there was no better way to grow up than to join the service, get an education in some field, and go on from there. So I looked for some schooling, and electronic training only required 3-year commitment with the Army, 6 for the Navy, 6 for the Air Force, and the Marines didn't offer that. So I chose the Army because there was only a 3-year commitment. Went through basic training. I was in charge of a squad. My DI, Sergeant Leo Elliott, I met in Vietnam, and I thanked him for saving my life. That was some of the best training I've ever had in my life, just basic survival. Learn how to shoot a weapon, etc.
Sergeant Elliott was your drill instructor, is that right?
Yes, he was, Leo Elliott. He treated me different than the others. He rode me really hard, but he'd call me down to his office, and I'd have to stand outside his office while he talked to another drill instructor, and they were discussing what was going on tomorrow. And then when he was done talking to him, I'd learn what we were going to do tomorrow, and I could prepare my guys. And when I said, when I first came in, he said, Roman, wait outside. I'll be with you. And that's when they had the discussion. Then he said, Roman, you can leave now. So he made it clear to me I was there to learn. So I'd go back to my guys and say, this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow. Anybody have a problem with that? How can we help you get through this? And we were the best squad for basic training. We did everything right. And one incident in that stands out in my memory. There was a little short guy, Rusty Wilson, was my right-hand man. And Rusty was always the guy who would take the message out. In basic training, you have a time for the buffer and you have a time not for the buffer. In other words, you had X number of minutes to clean your room with the buffer. Our time was up, and Rusty was the one that always brought the buffer in. And unlike everybody else who took their boots off, I kept my boots on, and I had a path from bed to bed to bed to outside the room, and I wouldn't mess up the floor. And Rusty was starting to bring their buffer in. All of a sudden, there was a commotion outside, and the guy said, "It's my time for the buffer." Rusty said, "It's not. It's our time. Look at your watch." So I bounced from bed to bed, went out there, and grabbed the buffer from the guy trying to steal it from Rusty. At which time, the guy from the other side of us came to get the buffer, and he was yelling at Rusty. This guy was yelling at me on my side. And the guy came at me and threw a punch as the guy was coming up behind me trying to get the buffer from us. I ducked. That guy knocked out the guy who was coming to get the buffer. I, being in my boots and him in his socks, I threw him against the wall, and as he bounced off the wall, I punched him once and he went down. There's a big commotion outside. There's two guys laying knocked out. I knocked out one of them, and Leo Elliott comes up, and Rusty says, "Sergeant Elliott, you should have seen Roman. I had the buffer, and this guy came and knocked him out, and then this guy came and Roman knocked him out, and we got the buffer." Elliott turned around and left.
Who would have thought a buffer was a hot commodity item in basic? I remember the buffer. We had in an Air Force basic, don't laugh, Mike, but we had a piece of metal that separated one side of the dorm from a hallway, and we call it the Cadillac. And that had to be gleaming in our inspections.
Yep.
And I remember certainly the buffer and cleaning the day room, and there was a closet in the day room that contained all of our civvies, right? All of our suitcases we brought to basic with us. And there was one day in particular in basic when, after a few weeks, when the drill instructor, at least with us, the TI would leave us alone for the weekends at least, right? We still had stuff to do, but we didn't have him right over our shoulder. And so we were trying, several folks in the flight were trying to take the ceiling tiles out to get over the partition between the day room and the closet to get to some of the things we brought. And we I don't think we were successful, but we didn't get caught. So, but anyway, what goes on in basics got to stay in basic. But I love that story about the buffer, and for that matter, Chris, about some of the background behind your family's service in the military and commitment to service and sacrifice. That's fascinating. So let's talk more about your time. As you progress from basic, you alluded to the electronic stuff. What was your official MOS?
31S30. I was a crypto maintenance man.
31S30. What'd you do in that role?
Fix teletypes. No, I was trained to be a field crypto maintenance man. So all the field crypto gear, the KY8s, KW7s, radios that were put in helicopters for enciphered transmissions, teletypes that were in comm centers, radios that were carried on people's backs, all had the ability to be enciphered. And we trained for a year in the States on how to maintain that equipment.
Did that require a top secret clearance?
Yes, it did. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to brag because I had a higher security clearance than the President of the United States because I had crypto access next to my name, and the President can't do that. But it was great training. And there were 11 guys who tested each other. So if you were working on a problem and you went to the bathroom, when you came back to your equipment that you were trying to fix a problem on, that problem wasn't there anymore. You had a different problem. we just screwed with each other. And the 11 of us were top graduates. I mean, so few people understand what competition can truly do. We didn't try to kill each other. We just tried to make each other better.
The 11 folks you're talking about, it was one cohort in the technical training school. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. The 11 of us were that close. And I didn't know that at that time, but we had something else in common. And the one thing we had in common was we were very good in school, and we had all signed up to go to OCS, Officer Candidate School. But we wound up in the same company and near the end of our training for Christmas. We were going to school during the day. We were in a night company, so we got screwed out of 16 hours of leave. So we had to wait until the guys came home later that night before we could get dismissed. So we decided to throw a little party. And booze was involved. And I think we threw $2 or something like that in a hat. And whoever had a valid ticket for alcohol with the least cost got the pot. No, I just got a bottle of good red wine, and I didn't care for losing the $2.
Let's talk about moving from basic, and now we're talking through technical
AIT.
school. Yeah.
But those 11 guys, we all went to Vietnam all together, and 10 of us came home together. And John Carney, who was a good friend of mine at the time, when we graduated, he and his wife drove me to Newark, and I got to hold John's, I think she was 4-month-old baby at that time. John and I flew over to Vietnam together, spent the first night together at Tan Son Nhut, ran from the bunk to the bunkers like 5 or 6 times that night. And John was a really smart guy. And we came back the last time, and John says, Mike, I don't know if I can do this. I said, do what, John? He says, how the hell are we going to, if this is Vietnam, how the hell are we going to survive this? You don't know when you're going to die. I said, well, you're right, John. You don't know when you die. John, do you ever know when you're going to die? He said, no. I said, so why let it bother us? He says, well, Mike, you got a good point. Let's make this agreement. We died tonight, and all after this is just gravy. So that's how we got through Vietnam. John and I, again, being close through training, he got Dong Tam and I got Canto, and we were 60-something miles apart. But every Thursday night we got on teletext because there was a circuit between Dong Tam and Canto. And I'd type RY on the teletext that alerted the operator to, come look. And then I'd type in John, and he'd go get John, and we'd talk on a teletype.
Was that your second tour?
That was my first tour.
First tour, okay.
And then one day, John didn't answer. And I didn't know what happened. Nobody would tell me. They closed the Dong Cam's comm center and sent the teletype operators up to us. And I went around asking, hey, you from Dong Cam? Yeah. Do you know John? Yeah. Well, what happened? Go talk to that guy. So I made our way over to that guy. I said, hey, did you know John Carney? And the guy starts crying. I said, oh, man, I didn't mean to open any wounds. He says, no. He says, it was my fault. We were on guard duty. We were walking back. It was my turn to turn the equipment in. I had to go take a leak. John said he'd put it away for me. And John never knew what hit him. I said, so what the hell happened? He says, some hophead came, pulled the pins from his grenades and put the grenades in the case. John had his back to the cases, never knew what hit him.
Wow.
And I thought about that 4-month-old daughter. And it took me until the internet got invented to find her. And for a few months, I told her that, hey, when you ever have a question about your daddy, here's my number, you can call me. She'd call me all hours of the day and night, tell me about my daddy. And I'd make up stories, let her know what a good man he was. I had never got to the point where I wanted to tell her what really happened. We never discussed that. But then one day she calls me up and says, Mike, she said, we're going to stop this. I'm moving, I'm changing my phone number. I'm not going to get back on that site anymore. And I said, whoa, what's going on? And she says, people are calling me all hours of the day and night, calling me my dad a baby raper and a mother killer and a mother raper and a baby killer. I said, don't lose my phone number. When you want to talk, call me. She never did. But I found her again. We had a brief conversation.
So John Carney, certainly rest in peace. I hope his family and his daughter is doing well. That is such a tough shoes to put yourself in, right? Tough
Yes.
situation to relate to, just that tremendous amount of loss. And
can you understand the pride it gave me to be able to make up stories about her daddy? What an awesome opportunity.
Yep. I love your stories, and I love your compadres and your colleagues that you're sharing with stories about and your experiences about with Chris and I. Who else would you point to, a couple other folks that you served with that are just salt of the earth people that you wouldn't have been able to navigate through without them?
Funny you should mention that. Talmadge Moon was our warrant officer. And a few years ago, I reached out and found Talmadge Moon on Facebook. He told me about a guy named Sam Albers, who was shorter than me. And a little story about Sam. Came into the crypto room. We were working on a problem. We're trying to solve a problem that, and I don't remember what was the full details, but Sam was about 5'6", 5'7", and we had these high tabletops. And he walks in and says, "I'm Sam Albert. I'm the new E5, and I took over from that lazy E8. I'm the new conference center director." You know, me being a smart aleck, I said, "Who in the heck said that?" And I'm looking around. There's this short little guy on the other side there. And I did somebody say that that I'm not seeing? And he said, "I said that." I said, "Well, who the hell are you?" He says, "I just told you." So we were friends immediately.
Well, now was Talmadge Moon, was that one of the...
He was the CW3. He was the warrant officer that ran our comm center.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
Sam Albert is now a part of this group of Talmadge Moon, me, Richard Amoroso, an Italian from the Bronx area, I believe he grew up, and John McLean, who was my best friend and Q-mate in Vietnam. John and I made a pact that he would be at my wedding and I'd be at his. And he waited for me to finish my second tour before he got married, much to the chagrin of his wife, who didn't talk to me for probably 3 years because he had to delay the wedding.
Well, now, was he at your wedding too?
No, he didn't. Susan and I got married on Pearl Harbor Day, which was Dead Day at Valdosta. And we only had, my mom and dad didn't come. Nobody from my family came. Her brother and sister came. And that was the only family that came to the wedding. We didn't give anybody notice. But John was PO'd at me that I didn't call him and tell him about the wedding. But we got over that.
Of the 11 folks that you were going through back in tech school, are you still in touch with any of those folks?
Not the 11, but Sam Albert, Richard Amoroso, John McLean, and a few others in Talmadge Moon. Talmadge is in his 80s. He's got emphysema, and the hurricane. He had 2 hurricanes come through this year. I tried, "Talmadge, I got a room for you, man. Let me come down and get you." He says, "No, Mike, I'm on oxygen. I got family close. I'm not leaving." Couldn't get him to come up. So he worried us, but he's okay.
He's a fighter, sounds like.
Yep, he is a fighter.
Let's talk about some of the accomplishments you look back at, formal, informal. Clearly you had some really dear people that you served with, and in an era that didn't get its due in terms of recognized for their contributions and sacrifices. All of that was overdue. What are some things you point to that you and the folks you served with got done that you take most pride in?
We won Comm Center of the Year award, I believe. We were fighting uptime. We, the maintenance team, understood how important our job was. We didn't do our job, people died. It's just as simple as that.
When you say, just to clarify, Mike, when you say fighting uptime, you're trying to keep the communication system up and running,
yes,
so
sir,
that you could coordinate the
whatever needed to be coordinated.
Yeah.
If it was enemy locations, if it was terrorist activities, whatever needed to be because we were the center for 4th Corps in Vietnam. There were 4 corps in Vietnam, and we were 4 Corps. It was a pride in each of us. And, Sam Albert, being an E5, taking over from an E8, kicking a guy out because he couldn't do his job. There's a lot to be said for Sam Albert. Richard Amoroso, the best teletype man. He could fix teletypes in his sleep. McLean was the only fixed crypto gear maintenance guy in the 4 Corps. So he got traveled around a lot, and someone had to learn to fix the machines when he wasn't there in our comm center. So he trained me how to change tubes because he had the older gear, and I got to be pretty efficient at that. There were several others. Some of the other maintenance men, Tom Johnson. Tom lives out in Pasadena, California. I'm still in touch with these people.
Love it.
And, you know, if somebody asked me about, you got friends, Roman? I don't know, you got friends. And I said, well, you know, I know a guy can call and he'll pick up by the 3rd ring. And we tried that one day, and Tom picked up the phone on the 2nd ring. Said, Roman, what's going on? What can I do for you? Well, he and I haven't met since he left Canto.
Wow.
Cameron Bay, because he came with me to Cameron Bay because we had some manufacturing expertise, and we were sent up to Cameron Bay to help set up a manufacturing flow for building these devices that got implanted in the field to detect troop movements, vehicle movements. We could detect swimmers in the canals. We could listen to conversations going on in the jungles and stuff. And he and I helped put in a flow manufacturing process.
Love that. That teed you up for a lot of what you did. Maybe
not knowing, but yes, not knowing that was going to be my future.
I love that, Mike. I know that there's so many other stories and individuals that you served with and that you experienced in Vietnam. We'll have to have a second part, second chapter, Chris, to Mike Roman's story, maybe. Let's talk, if we can, Mike, let's talk about your transition. You know, that gets, regardless of the generation of veteran that we talk to here, that seems to get a lot of attention as companies and businesses and current veterans are all trying to figure out that transition process. And you know, that's probably one thing that you and I haven't chatted about in all of our many conversations through the years. And I know that's something that Chris and I are really curious about. Tell us about that transition for you and what that was like. And then we're going to get you to share some advice with other veterans that are maybe transitioning now. But what was it like for you?
I came home from Vietnam twice. First one was on Kent State Day, and I don't have to say anything about that. Second time I came home was a week or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And my dad had a big job and had lost it. He didn't get along with Louis Kafori, his boss. And he picked me up in Atlanta. And they were living in Valdosta. The first words out of my dad's mouth when I got to the car were, how come you didn't just fly to Valdosta? I could have picked you up at the airport there.
Gosh. Wow. What a fine how you do, Mike.
Yeah. Vietnam was not popular. And my dad, and I didn't know about my dad losing his job, which explained something, but I didn't know at the time. So I said, thank you very much. And we rode in silence home. He said, so how long are you going to be here? And I said, I really don't know. He says, well, it's $75 a week.
Sounds like a deal.
Yeah. So I paid rent to stay in my dad's home. He left the next week. He got a job and left me to sell his 5,200 square foot home. Didn't know anybody in town. He had a realtor and all that. And I started drinking. And I was still Catholic at the time. And I went to Mass and met this Irish missionary guy. Said hello to him. Got one of some of the parishioners who knew my dad introduced me to him. And his name was Father Timmons. And he became my drinking buddy. And I learned his story, and he learned mine, and learned that he was an IRA guy, you know, the Irish Republican Army.
Right.
And one of his bombs killed a bunch of kids, which he had not meant it to. Saw the errors of his ways, became a priest, and decided to be a missionary in America. So he helped me come down, helped me understand that people are just ignorant. sometimes and to let it be water like off a duck's back. So Father Timmons really helped me. And he played a later role, too. When Susan and I got married, and we'll celebrate our 48th wedding anniversary in a couple days here. It's December 7th. We chose it. December 7th as a symbolic day for us. It symbolizes our relationship. Right. That's Pearl Harbor Day.
Right.
So Bud Curtis was a sociology professor there. Susan knew Bud. I knew Bud. We had a Catholic and Methodist minister marry us in the Catholic Church in Valdosta, Georgia, serving communion in both species, the Methodist and the Catholic, the wafer and the wine. It had not been done in the United States. Huh. So Valdosta, Georgia got on the maps. The relationship with Father Timmons and John Curtis and my major professor, Kelly Wells at Valdosta, really helped bring me home. You know, I understood that, yeah, I have a role to play. Yes, people can be stupid. And the more you don't reveal a whole lot about yourself, the better off everybody is. Mm. So I applied myself, and Kelly Wells was like a drill instructor. He became my major professor, and he put me to task. He told all the professors in the psych department that if you need someone for your class, you can go to Mike. He'll teach that class for you, but he needs 5-minute prep time. So I was teaching Jung, and I was teaching Maslow, and Kelly would come to me and say, hey, I'm not feeling well. I need you to do statistics, and we're talking about standard deviation today. So I'd have to go do that class. Or he'd call me physiology. I'm doing physiology today, Mike, and you need to do physiology of the ear.
Now, how young were you when about this time? I didn't realize quite how early you started instructing, because you've done a lot of that in your career. How old were you?
I'm trying to remember. I was born in 48, and that was 75, 76.
Wow, okay.
So what was that, 28, something like that?
Gosh. And just able to switch from one subject to the next with little prep time, huh?
Well, I didn't sleep a lot. I had to do a lot of reading. So, yeah. But I learned so much, Scott. Mm. I learned so much.
Let's pick your brain. If you had a chance to speak with military members that are getting ready, or maybe they're in the middle of their own transition, or they're getting ready to transition, what's a couple pieces of advice that you would offer these men and women?
Join the VFW, the American Legion, and find a buddy. There are plenty of us available if you just seek us out. And bare your soul to them, because they've been there, they've done that.
You know, part of what I'm hearing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mike, but one of the common themes we've heard as we talk with folks after their service is really important to admit when your things aren't okay. And yep. To your point, bare your soul, talk with someone, get it out, get whatever you need to get okay, but admit and be, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think
nope.
It sounds like in the Vietnam era, that was a challenge. It's still a challenge, decades later with current veterans, I think, leaving the service. And that's such an important thing to make folks aware of, right?
Yes, sir. It really is. I belong to a lot of veterans groups. And you know what the vast majority of them are? Vietnam vets. Mm. We didn't have anybody to come home to help us out.
Right.
I joined the VFW in Valdosta. And, nobody talked to me in a meeting. And, I didn't know much about Valdosta. I'd finally gotten a decent job at Patchogue, Plymouth as an industrial electrician. And the guy who taught me more than anything else was a black guy. And we didn't talk much other than he showed me how to do things. And Valdosta was still not integrated, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And having been a member of the VFW, I learned that this guy was a Vietnam vet too. I knew the sheriff, Jules Futch, because I met him one of the parties my dad had that I got invited to, and I met Jewel Futch and the mayor and a bunch of other people. And Jewel Futch told me one day, he says, Mike, boy, you need anything, and I mean, boy, you need anything, you come to me. He was talking about alcohol, drugs, and women. Well, I take my buddy, we go to the VFW, and got kicked out. They wouldn't let the guy in. So I said, tell you what.
Just based on the color of his skin, is that?
Yes, sir. Didn't know who he was, what he'd done. Just, he's black, you don't come in here. So I said, tell you what, go wait in the car. We'll be right out. I went in there, we go through the pledge and all that kind of stuff for the VFW. Then I said, I'd like the floor. Mr. Rome, you got something to say? I said, yes, sir. Opened up my wallet, pulled out my card, tore it up, threw it on the floor, and I said, you guys are nothing but assholes. Excuse my French. I said, you think I'm going to join an organization like this that doesn't honor its veterans? You got another thing coming. It'll be a cold day in hell if I ever come back to this. Friends with some of the Johns Creek Veterans Association and Jay Cohen, another Vietnam vet who was a Navy corpsman and worked with the Marines in Vietnam, called me up one day and said, hey, Rome, you want to go to the VFW with me? I said, let me tell you a little story. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go next week. Temperature outside was 17. That qualified as cold as hell. And I joined the VFW up here in Johns Creek. It was Alpharetta at the time.
So we want to talk a lot more about some of the groups you're in and why that's so important. But before we do, Mike, I want to bring Chris back in. And Chris, let's talk with Mike a little bit about his professional career post-Vietnam, and of course some of the association work that you and I collaborated with so much with Mike on.
I mean, Mike, you probably did most of your work before I even met you in terms of, your ERP implementations and experience, but I did meet you through another, similar to the VFW, another professional association. So it sounds like you're active and you like to get involved. So the organization was APIX. Now they're changing their name to ASCM, but you were pretty involved in that for a long time. Would you say, again, like Scott said, not to put words in your mouth, but would you say getting involved in associations like that helps as well in transitions in career management?
Absolutely, because it gives you a purpose. You have the opportunity for a purpose if you choose it. Not being a timid person, when I was working at Control Data, they asked us to join APIX. We had a group membership. And I was taking the exams. I passed the MRP exam without ever cracking a book because I had read George Plasso back when I was in grade school. So my dad gave me his book on bills of material.
So Mike, if I can just level set. So APIX they provide professional education and certification for supply chain professionals. It's recognized globally, and you were involved. That's when you're talking about the exams. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was taking exam, learning about that body of knowledge. And I passed the MRP exam, never cracking a book, took the inventory management, and I got an F. Did not pass. So I called up APIX, and I said, who in the heck is in charge of this inventory management module? They said, Bob Levy. I said, well, where's Bob Levy? Atlanta. Oh, really? I'm in Atlanta. Well, why don't you go to an APIX meeting? I did, and I met Bob Levy. And chased him all over the place, trying to ask him to help me understand why EOQ was so darned important. Because to pass the inventory management module, you had to understand the synthesis of EOQ. And I told him, Bob, you know how many people use EOQ nowadays? Ever since they invented this process called material requirements planning, there's so few people that use EOQ anymore.
I got to admit, I don't know what EOQ stands for. So Mike, please fill me in.
Economic order quantity.
It's how to, at what point do you order something based off the cost of carrying inventory and how much it costs to order?
Yes, sir.
Place an order. So it's a mathematical equation that is pretty much obsolete.
It was then too.
But Mike, really quick, we should probably be upfront and frank with the audience. Mike, Chris, and I are all what we'd probably term supply chain geeks, and that's the stuff we love. So if there's a nice strong flavor of supply chain in this next part of the interview, that's why. So, but Mike, please continue.
All right. So, I chased Bob all over. I bought him a glass of wine so he'd slow down and talk to me a little bit. Because he always I don't know if you guys knew Bob Levy, but he always had a glass of red wine in his hand.
It's not a bad way to go through life, is it?
No, not bad. And as a matter of fact, when he retired from Apex, he opened up his own bar in Dunwoody. And it was a wine store, believe it or not. Anyway, he got tired of me chasing him all over the place. And he says, Roman, if you're so interested in this, get involved and change it. And I said, wow, I will. Moving from there, I didn't have the job I wanted. We were writing a capital M, capital R, capital P, manufacturing resource planning system. And we had written it for mini computers. PCs were coming out. So Control Data fired everybody, rehired me as a consultant to help convert the system to a PC-based. And I got involved with Apex very heavily at that point and got another job. I got a job at a company, and I was IT manager. I was inventory manager. I helped schedule the plant. And I don't know, there were 4 or 5 hats I wore.
Wow. I was about to say the same thing. Goodness gracious. So when you're talking about getting more involved with Apex, I think
that's where this is going.
Yeah. You sat on the national or the international body that helped develop curriculum, right?
Yes. And what had happened was a lady in shipping came to me and says, Mike, I hear you talking about this Apex stuff, and I like your classes, and I'm starting to understand some of it. But how do I get involved with Apex? And I said, okay, you do shipments. Let's see, we can put you into inventory. No, inventory management, that's not a place for you. Let's see if we start you with MRP. No, MRP's not for you. We can put you in forecasting is not for you. And I said, you know what? I don't know. Let me go back to the board. And I was president of the Apex chapter at the time. So let me go back and ask my board that question. So I went in there at our next meeting, and we were holding meetings in the Pink Building downtown. I had all the chairs removed from the room so we could have short meetings. and there was here's the agenda. You want to get on the agenda, you talk about that next time. So anyway, I asked the group, I said, I've changed the agenda, you see, and I'm asking this question. Where do we start people? In our education system, what do they take first? Well, what's their job? I have a shipping clerk who's really shipping manager. Where do we start her? Oh, nobody has an answer. Okay. If I have an inventory person who unpacks purchases and puts them away, where do we start her? She's not managing inventory. Oh, nobody has an answer for that. Does anybody see a problem here? What are we going to do about it? Gary Bedford was part of that group. Carolyn Torrey was part of that group. And Gary stands up and says, I got the same problem in my company. Carolyn stands up, I got the same problem in my company. I said, thanks for volunteering. The 3 of us will make a committee.
A standing committee, no less, Mike.
Thank you very much, Scott. You got it. A standing committee. Anyway, we put together what is now called the basics of supply chain management, because we were just trying to solve a problem in our plants. And Gary being an Army guy, Carolyn wasn't, but when you see an opportunity, you seize it and you make the most out of it. This woman coming to me saying, where do I start to get an education so I can be somebody for my daughter and make some decent money? There are opportunities everywhere if you just open your eyes and get involved. And that's what I've learned from the service. Your service is your service. You're educated in this area. Maybe you can get educated in another area, but you can still serve. Just look for opportunities to serve. And that's been my message through life.
I love that because it's not just been your message. It's been the action you've taken. And in fact, Chris, I want to, the last time you and I and Mike probably hung out was with a neat little ceremony that we had with his Johns Creek Veterans Association, where Mike was inducted as only 4 inductees total. So it's very, very prestigious, very limited, but he's a member of the Apex Atlanta Hall of Fame, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
And that's based off of decades of serving the industry, serving the supply chain, of course, countlessly serving the veteran community, which really we both admire. I've long admired, but not just serving, but making significant contributions like you're just talking about, the basics of supply chain, and then helping develop that curriculum across the association, right?
Yes.
I mean, that legacy is still there.
I was on the exam committee for 12 years. Vietnam is starting to catch up with me. And I didn't have health insurance when I started my company. And our fortune is gone because of medical issues. So somebody said, hey, why don't you go talk to the VA? And I said, I did back in 1982, and I got kicked out because I couldn't get along with anybody. So I've re-seized that opportunity, and I'm getting help from the VA for a number of things.
Last time we chatted, I think there were some challenges in getting what you needed and getting people that really wanted to sit down and figure things out. And so it sounds like there's been progress made here recently then, Mike.
Yes, there is. And one of the things that's helped me is to serve as a Mason. I'm a Mason, and I followed in my dad's father's footsteps. I'm still early in my Masonic journey. I've gone through 2 parts of it, and there's another 1.5 to go. It's service as well, and I don't know how to put it more plainly than that. The Army makes good men. Freemasonry makes good men better. The exam committees, gosh, we had some wonderful times. 12 years being with those folks, and I'm still in touch with a bunch of them. I can make a phone call to Tom Johnson, who I served with in Canton and Cameron Bay. I can make a phone call to Richard Amoroso or Sam Abbott or Talmadge Moon. Talmadge Moon will pick up on the 2nd ring. Tommy Johnson will pick up for the 3rd ring. I might have to ring 6 or 7 times to get Albert off his fat butt, but we're still talking, and it's been more than 50 years. Who has people that they worked with 50 years ago they still know and they can still kid with,
Well, Mike, you might get a kick out of this. Yeah, I met you and Chris around the same time, right? And it was through the Apex Atlanta chapter. And through the years, we've done a variety of different things. Really enjoyed, serving with you on especially veterans initiatives, you name it. But first time, so Chris, when Chris and I first met, he was giving a presentation to the chapter. And it was way back when, if you remember, Mike, we'd meet at the bottom of the Hilton Garden Inn in this long rectangular room. So if you're in the back, if you showed up late, good luck trying to hear or see the slides. And that was me that night, right? So I remember Chris finishing up his presentation said, hey, feel free, if you want a copy of the presentation, just give me a shout. So young buck I was, since I couldn't see anything he was talking about, I called him either the next day or maybe 2 days later. And I called Chris on the cell that he shared with everybody, and I go, hey, Chris, this is Scott Luton from Apex Atlanta last night. He goes, who? I said, I heard your presentation. You said we could call you and get a copy. Click. And from that time, I might have embellished over the years since then.
It gets better each time, Mike. It gets better each time.
It does. But I love Mike, how you put it around the 2 rings and the 3 rings. But more importantly, having all those wonderful relationships, and as we've learned in 2020, through this historically challenging year, man, relationships are never have been as important. Trusting, valuable relationships still make the business and supply chain and veteran initiatives take place and happen. And I love how you've echoed and really doubled down on that through this conversation here.
Well, I don't know what to say, but thank you. You got to have a mission in life. Don't play dead.
Well, the other thing that was, Chris, that if you remember, Lornette Vestal was an earlier guest of ours. Great interview there. And he really shared something with me that despite all of the different ways that different veteran groups I've been a part of, never really thought about, but he really made a point of how so many veterans they keep serving even after the uniform comes off. And Mike, you're like the epitome of that. I mean, all the different groups that you help. I mean, I can remember countless emails and phone calls where you're trying to help this veteran do this and this veteran do that. That didn't, either they didn't have a connection or they didn't have the wherewithal or whatever it is. And you've just been dedicated to that, and it's been very much appreciated. And I know we're only giving folks a sliver of what you've done in this hour or so here, but man, we need a lot more Mike Romans in life, and really, we really appreciate all that you've done and continue to do.
Well, thank you. I don't know what to say. You're making me blush. Yeah,
it's about the connections and the networking. I think it comes through in what you were talking, what you've been saying, Mike. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but you've impacted part of my career. I was probably 10 years ago, but there was an ERP company, and they were looking for a specific skill set, and they called me out of the blue, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. I don't know who you are, but how do you know me? And they're like, well, Mike Roman said to call you. So wow. That's proof in the pudding right there. It's about the network.
The one and only Mike Roman. Well, Mike, I know you're active on Facebook. I'm not sure if you're still active on LinkedIn, but if folks wanted to, get in touch and pick your brain on whether it's supply chain related experiences and expertise, or maybe about your Vietnam days or your days serving, how can folks get in touch with you?
Facebook is the best way.
And to our listeners, if you're not on Facebook, feel free to shoot us a note. And we'll get you in touch with Mike. You can shoot us a note to amanda@supplychainnow.com, and we'll make sure we get you connected with one and only Mike Roman.
Michael A. Roman. If they want to find me on Facebook, it's Michael A. Roman with a period after A.
Well, Mike, we're here at the tail end of 2020. 2021 is just around the corner. I know we're all looking forward to getting into a new year, right?
Yes, sir.
I hope we get through this sooner rather than later, get through this pandemic, and we can get together in person and break bread and check back in with you and the Johns Creek Veterans Association. In particular, the Vietnam Wall, the traveling wall is a great initiative that y'all have been a part of. Where does that project stand?
It's pretty much in. Now there's I think some trim work needs to be done, putting marble on the top of it, but it's in. We're going to do some landscaping this coming spring.
So they've implemented a replica of the Vietnam Memorial right there in Johns Creek. Is that right?
Yes, sir. It's a replica of the wall in Vietnam, the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C. We had a bid for that thing. We asked them to come through at Georgia. The traveling wall came in, and we had a very good year for them. We made their year. They collected a lot of money, donations from the people that came by, and they said, hey, you guys ever want to buy one of these? We retire these every so often, and we put in a bid for it. Well, Dallas, Texas also had that wall out there, and there became a bidding war. We did remind them that we raised more money than Dallas did, so they gave us the last bid.
And you won.
And we won.
And so the replica here is in Johns Creek, just north of Atlanta.
Newtown Park.
That's right. I've been there before when it was still traveling. So much good stuff. And Mike, really appreciate all that you do. This is the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. But before we say goodbye to Mike, Chris, what we've heard over the last hour and some change, what's the best part of this conversation with Mike that you've enjoyed the most?
You can hear it in his voice. Get involved. He has compassion for people. It's not so much that he can get involved and say, oh, look how great I am. He really wants to help people. And if I can just give a small quote, one of my favorites, it kind of indemnifies what Mike's about. Clayton Christensen, who passed away this year, he quoted, don't worry about the level of individual prominence you have achieved. Worry about the individuals you have helped become better people. And I can hear it in Mike's voice. That's really what he's all about. And the second thing is, Scott, I think we have a title for this podcast. If anybody was listening, I'm going to call it the Buffer 11.
The Buffer 11.
You have to hear the whole story. So that's a throwback. But that's what I've got. I have a respect for Mike, what he's done for me, and the relationships and the friendships. So thank you, Mike.
Deeds, not words is a phrase that we are very passionate about and really championing and putting into action. And Mike is a take action guy. And so Mike Roman, really a pleasure to talk with you here today. Thanks so much for carving some time out, and we hope to reconnect in person again real soon.
Well, Scott, the deeds, not words, There's a Vietnam veteran friend of mine who's has got some cancer issues right now, and he's been in solitary confinement because of his lack of an immune system. That's one of his favorite quotes. So I'd like to give a shout out for Pete Manfred.
Pete Manfred. Pete Manfred. Well, Pete, if you're listening, hey, all the best in this battle you're going through now, and I love that calling, that where it's not about lip service, it's about taking action and making things happen. And so, Pete, wherever you are, all the best, prayers and best wishes in this challenge. And if you're anything like Mike, you're going to beat it down and then be ready for your next challenge. So, Mike, I really appreciate you sharing that.
He has 2 Purple Hearts.
Wow. Goodness gracious.
Thank you, guys.
Well, hey, Mike, really appreciate it. We'll be back in touch soon. And to our audience, hopefully y'all have enjoyed this frank and informative and entertaining conversation that we've gotten from Mike Roman, just like Chris, just like we knew we were in store for, right?
Yes, sir.
I hope you enjoyed it. On behalf of the entire Veteran Voices team, we invite you to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you're a veteran with a story to tell, reach out. We'd love to feature you on one of our upcoming episodes. On behalf of our entire team here, Scott Luton and Chris Barnes, wishing our listeners nothing but the best. Hey, do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. Be just like Mike Roman. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Veteran Voices. Thanks, everybody.